Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to Golden Echoes Hub. It's Charlotte here, and I'm so glad you're joining me again. We're sharing a new story every 2 hours today as part of our launch collection, and this one's called The Neighbor Who Taught Me to Fight Loneliness. It's a story about finding light in the darkest of times, and I hope it touches your heart as much as it did mine. So, settle in with a warm drink, maybe a cup of chamomile tea, and let's go back to a cold winter morning in 2002. My name's Charlotte Harper. I'm 80 now, living in my little cottage in Asheville, North Carolina, where the mountains stretch out like a painting and the air feels crisp in the mornings. But today, I want to take you back to a time when I was 67. A time when loneliness wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, and I wasn't sure I'd ever find my way out. This is the story of how a neighbor, a woman I barely knew, changed everything. It was the winter of 2002. I'd been a widow for 10 years by then, ever since my husband Tom passed away in '92. I'd gotten used to the quiet, maybe too used to it. My children, Emily and Daniel, were busy with their own lives. Emily was raising her kids in Raleigh, and Daniel was out in California, working long hours at his tech job. They'd call when they could, and I'd visit for holidays. But most days, it was just me in the house. The silence was deafening sometimes. I'd always been a social person. Back when Tom was alive, our home was full of laughter, friends dropping by for coffee, neighbors gathering for potlucks, the kids running through the yard. But after Tom passed, things changed. Friends moved away. Some passed on, and I found myself pulling back. I'd make excuses not to go to church socials or knitting circles. I'm too tired, I'd say. Or maybe next time. Truth was, I didn't know how to be around people anymore. I felt like a shadow of the woman I used to be. That winter was the hardest. The days were short, the nights long and cold. I'd wake up to a house that felt too big, too empty. I'd go through my routine, making coffee, tending to my roses in the greenhouse, knitting scarves for the grandkids. But it all felt hollow. I'd sit by the window in the evenings, watching the snow fall, and feel this ache in my chest. I was lonely, so lonely. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't even know how to admit it. One morning in January, I was shoveling snow off my front walk, more to keep busy than anything else, when I heard a voice call out, "Need a hand with that, Charlotte?" I looked up, and there was my neighbor, Clara Evans, standing at the edge of her yard. Clara was 70, a widow like me, but she had this spark about her, a brightness I envied. She'd moved in a year earlier, after her husband passed, but we'd only ever exchanged polite waves or small talk about the weather. "Oh, I'm fine, Clara," I said, brushing off her offer. "It's not much snow." But Clara wasn't having it. She marched over with her own shovel, her scarf flapping in the wind, and started clearing the path with me. "Nonsense," she said, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "It's more fun with two." I didn't argue. There was something about her energy, her smile, that made it hard to say no. We shoveled in silence for a while, the crunch of snow under our boots the only sound. Then Clara spoke up. "You know, Charlotte, I've been meaning to invite you over. I bake a mean apple pie, and I've got a fresh one cooling on the counter. Why don't you come by this afternoon? We can have a slice and chat. I hesitated. My first instinct was to say no. I was so used to keeping to myself. But Clara's eyes were so kind, and the thought of that pie, warm and sweet, was too tempting to resist. All right, I said finally. I'd like that. That afternoon, I bundled up and walked the short distance to Clara's house. Her kitchen smelled like apples and cinnamon, and the table was set with 2 plates, a pot of tea, and the most beautiful pie I'd ever seen. We sat down, and at first, I didn't know what to say. I'd forgotten how to make conversation, how to be a friend. But Clara made it easy. She asked about my roses, my grandkids, the scarf I was knitting. She told me about her own life, how she'd grown up in Georgia, how she and her husband used to travel the country in an old RV, how she'd taken up painting after he passed. As we talked, I felt something shift inside me. It was like a little crack in the wall I'd built around myself, letting in a sliver of light. Clara had this way of listening, really listening, that made me feel seen. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone. How much I missed Tom, how empty the house felt, how I didn't know how to fill my days anymore. She nodded, her eyes soft, and said, I know that feeling, Charlotte. I felt it too. But you don't have to go through it alone. That pie date turned into a weekly tradition. Every Thursday, I'd go to Clara's for tea and dessert. Sometimes pie, sometimes cookies. Once a peach cobbler that was so good I begged for the recipe. But it wasn't just the food that kept me coming back. It was Clara. She had this warmth, this way of making you feel like you mattered. She'd tell stories that made me laugh until my sides hurt. Like the time she accidentally dyed her hair green, trying to make a natural shampoo. And she'd listen when I needed to talk, never judging, always understanding. Clara didn't just stop at pie. She started inviting me to other things. Little outings that got me out of the house. We'd go to the farmer's market on Saturdays, picking out fresh apples for her pies and chatting with the vendors. She dragged me to a senior book club at the library, where I discovered a love for cozy mysteries. And when spring came, she convinced me to join her for a gentle yoga class in the park, laughing with me when we both wobbled during the tree pose. Through Clara, I started to see the world again. Not just the 4 walls of my house, but the people around me. I made new friends at the book club, women my age who'd also felt the sting of loneliness. We'd meet for coffee, share stories about our families, our pasts, our dreams. I started going to church socials again, something I hadn't done in years. And slowly that heavy blanket of loneliness began to lift. Clara passed away in 2005, just 3 years after that first pie. It was sudden, a stroke, the doctors said. I was heartbroken, but I wasn't alone anymore. The friends we'd made together, the routines we'd built, they carried me through. I still think of her every time I bake an apple pie, using her recipe. The one she wrote down for me on a little card with a smiley face in the corner. I keep that card in my kitchen. A reminder of the woman who taught me to fight loneliness with connection, with laughter, with a slice of pie, and a kind word. Now, at 80, I'm surrounded by people I love. My house isn't empty anymore. It's full of visits from my grandkids. laughter from my book club friends, and the memories of all the years I've lived. Clara taught me that loneliness doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes all it takes is one person to reach out, to remind you that you're not alone. And if you're feeling that ache right now, I hope you'll reach out too, to a neighbor, a friend, or even a stranger at the market. You never know what a simple hello might start. That's my story for today, dear friends. If a neighbor or anyone has ever helped you through a lonely time, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. We've got more stories coming today. Join me at 2 p.m. for the next one, about a dream I chase at 68. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Golden Echoes Hub. I'll see you soon.